What if I told you that one of the most controversial animated shows in television history almost never happened because its creator missed a flight that would have killed him? What if I told you that the voice of an innocent teenage boy was inspired by one of cinema's most terrifying serial killers? And what if I told you that behind the crude jokes and cutaway gags lies a show that has predicted scandals, been banned from television, and harbored secrets so dark that even the most dedicated fans have no idea they exist? For over 2 decades, Family Guy has pushed boundaries, sparked outrage, and somehow managed to stay on the air despite being canceled twice. But the real story isn't what you see on screen. It's what happens behind the scenes, in the writer's room, and in the twisted minds of the creators who brought Quahog's most dysfunctional family to life. Today, we're diving deep into the disturbing, shocking, and sometimes downright horrifying facts about Family Guy that will change the way you watch the show forever. Let's start with the fact that might be the most chilling of all. On September 10th, 2001, Seth MacFarlane was living the dream. Family Guy had just started finding its footing, and he was scheduled to fly from Boston to Los Angeles on American Airlines Flight 11. He'd been out late the night before, drinking after giving a speech at his alma mater. The next morning, hungover and running late, MacFarlane arrived at Logan International Airport. His travel agent had given him the wrong departure time, telling him the flight left at 8:15 when it actually departed at 7:45. He missed the plane by just 10 minutes. That flight, American Airlines Flight 11, would become the first plane hijacked by terrorists on September 11th, 2001. It was flown directly into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, killing everyone on board. MacFarlane sat in the airport lounge, waiting for the next flight, when he saw the news. The plane he was supposed to be on had just crashed into the World Trade Center. In interviews, MacFarlane has downplayed the significance, saying he'd missed many flights before and doesn't attach an unbelievable amount of significance to it. But think about what would have been lost that day. No Family Guy revival, no American Dad, no Cleveland Show, no Ted movies. The entire landscape of adult animation would be completely different. And here's something even more disturbing to consider. MacFarlane wasn't the only Hollywood figure who narrowly escaped death that day. Mark Wahlberg was also supposed to be on Flight 11, but chartered a private plane to Toronto at the last minute. Robert Downey Jr., who would later voice a character on Family Guy, has also been connected to the September 11th stories that circulated through Hollywood. The show itself would later make references to the attacks, but MacFarlane has always been careful about how he addresses his near-death experience, perhaps understanding that survivors' guilt is a real and heavy burden. Now let's talk about something that's been disturbing viewers since the show's inception, though most people don't realize where it comes from. Chris Griffin's voice. That dopey, awkward, innocent-sounding voice that makes him seem so endearing and harmless. Seth Green, the actor behind Chris, has revealed that he based the voice on one of cinema's most notorious serial killers. Not a real serial killer, but the character Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, the 1991 thriller that terrified audiences worldwide. Buffalo Bill, played by Ted Levine, was a serial killer who kidnapped women, starved them, and then skinned them to create a suit made of human skin. He's one of the most disturbing villains in film history, right up there with Hannibal Lecter himself. And this is what Seth Green was thinking about when he auditioned for Family Guy. He did an impression of Buffalo Bill speaking through a public address system at McDonald's. That's Chris Griffin. Every time you hear Chris say something sweet or naive, you're hearing an echo of one of horror's most twisted characters. The show even acknowledged this connection directly in Season 7, Episode 13, when Chris reenacted the infamous scene where Buffalo Bill dances in front of a mirror. The meta-reference was the show's way of winking at the audience, saying, yes, we know exactly what we did. But Chris isn't the only character with a disturbing origin story. Let's talk about Death himself. The Grim Reaper has appeared multiple times throughout the series, and he's voiced by different actors depending on the episode. Originally, Death was voiced by the legendary Norm Macdonald in the Season 2 episode titled Death is a Bitch. Macdonald brought his signature deadpan humor to the role, making Death less terrifying and more absurdly comedic. But here's what's disturbing. After Macdonald's death in September 2021, the show had to find someone else to voice the character when he appeared again. Adam Carolla took over the role in some episodes. Think about that for a moment. The voice of Death has literally died, and the show just kept going, recasting the personification of mortality as if it were any other role. It's darkly poetic in a way that only Family Guy could pull off, turning even real death into just another behind-the-scenes production detail. Macdonald never got to see how his portrayal of Death would be remembered, and now Death himself has outlived the man who gave him voice. Speaking of Death, let's discuss something that even casual fans might not fully grasp. Peter Griffin is, by any reasonable standard, a mass murderer. Not in a metaphorical sense, or through dark comedy exaggeration, but through actual depicted actions in the show. In the Season 11 episode Turban Cowboy, there's a cutaway gag where Peter participates in the Boston Marathon by driving his car through the finish line, running over and presumably killing dozens of runners. He does this with a smile on his face, treating mass murder as if it were a fun shortcut. The episode aired on March 17th, 2013. Less than a month later, on April 15th, the Boston Marathon bombing occurred, killing 3 people and injuring hundreds. The timing was horrifically coincidental, and Fox immediately pulled the episode from all streaming services and television broadcasts. It didn't air again until September 2022, nearly a decade later. Even Seth MacFarlane expressed regret about the scene, which is notable because the show rarely apologizes for its content. But here's the truly disturbing part. This isn't the only time Peter has committed mass murder on screen. Throughout the series, he's caused countless deaths through his recklessness, and the show treats it as comedy. He's caused plane crashes, building collapses, and catastrophic accidents that would result in massive casualties. The show's entire moral framework operates in this bizarre space where human life has no value, and consequences don't exist. Peter can kill dozens of people in one scene and be making pancakes in the next, as if nothing happened. It's nihilistic comedy taken to its absolute extreme. Let's move into even darker territory. The show has had multiple episodes that were too disturbing or controversial to air in the United States. The most infamous is Partial Terms of Endearment from Season 8, which was banned before it even had a chance to premiere. The episode deals with abortion, one of the most divisive topics in American culture. In the story, Lois agrees to be a surrogate mother for her old college friend and her husband. After Lois becomes pregnant, the biological parents die in a car accident, leaving her with a difficult decision about whether to continue the pregnancy. The episode attempts to present both sides of the abortion debate, with Peter being swayed by pro-life activists, and Lois ultimately deciding to have an abortion. The final scene has Peter breaking the fourth wall, turning to the camera and flatly stating, "We had the abortion," before the episode ends abruptly. Fox refused to air it. Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, which had previously aired another banned Family Guy episode, also refused. The episode was eventually released on DVD in 2010, but to this day, it has never aired on American television. Here's what makes this particularly disturbing. Kevin Riley, who was president of Fox Entertainment at the time, admitted that the decision to ban the episode wasn't really about the content itself. It was about money. In an interview with the New York Times, he said that the economy was struggling, advertisers were nervous, and abortion was just too hot button. The episode was handling the subject fine, he thought, but it could cause trouble, and it just wasn't worth it. So an entire episode that the writers and animators spent 10 months creating that cost about $2 million to produce was permanently shelved because of advertiser concerns. Art was censored not for being too offensive, but for being bad for business. What's even more disturbing is what the episode represents in the broader context of television. Since partial terms of endearment was banned in 2010, numerous other shows have tackled abortion, including BoJack Horseman, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and Grey's Anatomy. But Family Guy got there first, and for being ahead of the curve, it was punished. The episode remains the only Family Guy episode never to air in the United States, making it perhaps the show's rarest piece of content. But that's not the only episode that's been banned or pulled. Earlier, in Season 3, the episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein faced similar issues. The episode features Peter trying to find a Jewish person to help Chris with his math homework, operating on stereotypes about Jewish people being good with money. Fox executives worried it would be seen as anti-Semitic and pulled it from the schedule. It didn't air until 2004, years after it was made. The episode even includes a song where Peter sings about needing a Weinstein to help his family, complete with musical numbers that some found offensive. Seth MacFarlane defended the episode, arguing that it was satirizing stereotypes rather than endorsing them, but the damage was done. The network had already decided the risk was too great. Eventually, Adult Swim aired it in 2003, and Fox followed a year later, but the controversy highlighted something disturbing about the show's relationship with its network. Fox was willing to air almost anything, but when it came to religion and money, even they drew a line. Then there's the episode, Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q from Season 10, which many consider the darkest episode in Family Guy history. The episode deals with domestic violence in a way that's deeply uncomfortable for a show known for crude humor. Quagmire's sister Brenda is in an abusive relationship with her boyfriend Jeff, and the episode depicts graphic scenes of abuse and violence. The gang ultimately decides to murder Jeff to protect Brenda, luring him into the woods and beating him to death. The episode is disturbing because it's played relatively straight. There are still jokes, but the violence is depicted with unusual seriousness for Family Guy. Viewers see bruises, hear screaming, and watch a man die violently at the hands of the main characters. The episode generated significant controversy from domestic violence advocates who felt the show was trivializing a serious issue by mixing it with comedy. Others argued it was bringing attention to an important topic. Either way, it remains one of the most uncomfortable episodes to watch, especially for victims of domestic violence who might find the content triggering. Let's talk about another deeply disturbing element of the show that fans often overlook. Herbert the Pervert. He's a recurring character, an old man who lives near the Griffins and has an unsettling attraction to young Chris. The character is voiced by Mike Henry, who uses a creepy, whispery voice to deliver lines that are clearly meant to suggest pedophilia. Herbert makes sexual comments about Chris, tries to lure him with popsicles, and is generally portrayed as a child predator played for laughs. Think about that for a moment. One of Family Guy's recurring comedy characters is a pedophile. The show uses child predation as a source of humor, with Herbert appearing in dozens of episodes over the years. In any other context, this would be absolutely unacceptable. But in Family Guy's moral vacuum, it's just another running gag. Some argue the joke is that everyone knows Herbert is creepy and avoids him, making him pathetic rather than threatening. But others point out that normalizing this character, making him lovable or funny, is deeply problematic when real child abuse is such a serious issue. The character has appeared in episodes dealing with various scenarios, and his behavior has ranged from mildly creepy to outright predatory. The show has never seriously addressed the implications of having this character, instead treating him as harmless comic relief. For survivors of childhood sexual abuse, watching Herbert can be genuinely traumatic, yet the show continues to bring him back year after year. Now, let's discuss something that shocked even longtime viewers: Brian Griffin's suicide confession. In the Season 8 episode Brian and Stewie, the entire 21 minutes take place in one room, with just Brian and Stewie trapped in a bank vault. It's one of the most experimental episodes of the series, with no cutaway gags, no supporting characters, and a focus on genuine character development. At one point, Stewie discovers that Brian keeps a gun in his safety deposit box and asks him why. Brian, breaking down emotionally, admits that he's deeply unhappy and keeps the gun because he's considered ending his own life. He explains that knowing he has that option brings him comfort. For a show that usually treats death as a punchline, this moment is shockingly heavy. Brian, the voice of reason on the show, the intellectual cynic who often serves as the audience surrogate, is suicidal, and it's played completely straight, with no attempt to undermine it with humor. This revelation changes how you view Brian's entire character. His drinking problem isn't just a quirk, it's self-medication. His failed attempts at writing aren't just fodder for jokes about pretentious artists. They're manifestations of his deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. His cynicism isn't just comedic, it's a defense mechanism. The episode forces viewers to confront the idea that Brian, like many real people, is deeply depressed and has seriously considered suicide. What makes this even more disturbing is what happened later in season 12. In the episode, Life of Brian, Brian is hit by a car and killed. The show killed off one of its main characters, and for several episodes, he stayed dead. Fans were devastated. Some started online petitions to bring him back. Others accused the show of shock value cruelty. Eventually, Stewie used time travel to prevent Brian's death, and everything returned to normal. But think about what that story arc represents. The show brought Brian to the brink of suicide, let viewers sit with that knowledge, and then later actually killed him, only to bring him back as if death were just another plot device to be manipulated. For anyone who's lost someone to suicide or struggled with suicidal thoughts themselves, these storylines can be genuinely disturbing. The show plays with themes of depression and mortality in ways that blur the line between comedy and genuine darkness. And it's never clear whether the writers understand the weight of what they're depicting. Let's shift gears and talk about something that might be even more disturbing: the way the show treats Meg. For those unfamiliar, Meg is the eldest Griffin child, a teenage girl who serves as the family's punching bag. She's constantly insulted, neglected, and abused by her family. Peter openly expresses disgust at her existence. Lois is cold and dismissive. Chris is oblivious. Stewie occasionally shows kindness, but usually joins in the mockery. Brian, the only one who sometimes treats her decently, has also been attracted to her romantically in some episodes, which adds a whole other layer of disturbing implications given their age difference and the fact that he's a dog. The abuse Meg endures isn't just emotional. She's been physically beaten, locked in the basement, abandoned, and told repeatedly that she's worthless. One of the show's running gags is that Meg is ugly and unpopular, despite the fact that her character design isn't any different from other female characters on the show. The joke is that everyone agrees she's terrible, and this consensus makes the abuse acceptable. In the season 10 episode Seahorse Seashell Party, Meg finally snaps and confronts her family about their treatment of her. She delivers a powerful monologue about how they've scapegoated her, used her as an emotional outlet for their own problems, and made her life miserable. For a moment, it seems like the show might actually address this disturbing pattern. But then the episode does something even more disturbing. It suggests that Meg's role as the family scapegoat is necessary. Without her to abuse, the family turns on each other. So Meg chooses to continue being their punching bag because it keeps the family together. This message is deeply problematic. It suggests that abuse victims should accept their abuse for the greater good, that their suffering serves a purpose. It validates the family's terrible treatment of Meg by making it functional. The episode takes what could have been a moment of growth and empowerment and turns it into a defense of abuse. For young viewers, especially teenage girls who might identify with Meg's social struggles, this sends a horrifying message about self-worth and acceptable treatment from loved ones. The voice of Meg has its own disturbing backstory. Originally, Meg was voiced by Lacey Chabert, who you might know from Mean Girls or as Eliza Thornberry from The Wild Thornberrys. Chabert left after one season, and the role was taken over by Mila Kunis, who has voiced Meg ever since. The circumstances of Chabert's departure have never been fully explained, with various sources claiming schedule conflicts or creative differences. But think about what it means to be the original voice of a character who exists solely to be abused and degraded. Did Chabert see where the character was going and decide she didn't want to be part of it? We may never know, but it raises questions about what happens when actors realize they're voicing characters in genuinely disturbing scenarios. Let's talk about Seth MacFarlane's relationship with his own creation. In 2011, MacFarlane did an interview with The Hollywood Reporter where he admitted something shocking. He wished Family Guy was over. He said he thought 7 seasons was about the right lifespan for a TV series. This was during season 9, and the show was still massively popular. But MacFarlane felt burnt out, creatively exhausted by a show that had long since passed what he considered its natural endpoint. What's disturbing about this is that MacFarlane has continued voicing the characters while feeling this way. He's admitted in interviews that he stopped writing for the show entirely in 2010. He still does the voices for Peter, Stewie, Brian, Quagmire, and numerous other characters, but he hasn't contributed to a script in over a decade. Imagine being the creator of a show, the face of that show, and secretly wishing it would end while you're contractually obligated to keep working on it. It's like a prison of his own making, except the prison pays him millions of dollars. MacFarlane has focused his energy elsewhere, creating American Dad, The Cleveland Show, making movies like Ted and A Million Ways to Die in the West, and working on the science fiction series, The Orville. But Family Guy keeps going. A zombie show animated by people who aren't its original creator. Using characters he's tired of voicing, telling stories he's not writing. The show has become a franchise that exists beyond MacFarlane's control or interest, and yet his voice remains its most recognizable element. This raises a disturbing question about creative ownership and artistic integrity. When does a creator's work stop being theirs? When does it become a machine that runs on its own momentum, grinding out content regardless of the original vision? Family Guy has been renewed through season 27, meaning it will continue producing episodes for years to come, with or without MacFarlane's creative input. The show has become bigger than its creator, and he seems trapped by his own success. Let's dive into some of the show's most disturbing cutaway gags, because these brief moments often contain some of the darkest humor in television. One cutaway shows Peter Jr.'s grave, with Peter explaining that he thought shaking the baby would make him stop crying, and he was kind of right because the baby died. This is a joke about shaking a baby to death. Sudden infant death syndrome and shaken baby syndrome are real tragedies that destroy families, and Family Guy made it a punchline. Another cutaway depicts a musical number about Terry Schiavo, a woman who was in a persistent vegetative state for 15 years, while her family fought legal battles about her right to die. The cutaway shows children performing a school play called Terry Schiavo the Musical, singing lyrics like Terry Schiavo is kind of alive-o, and this dispenses gravy for her mashed potato brains. They turned a real woman's tragic medical situation, one that sparked national debate about end-of-life care and personal autonomy, into a comedy song performed by children. The real Terry Schiavo's family had to see this, had to know that their loved one's suffering was being mocked on national television. Then there's the cutaway about AIDS that aired in the episode If I'm Dyin', I'm Lyin'. Peter forms a barbershop quartet that performs at a hospital, singing to a patient that he has AIDS. The musical delivery of a terminal diagnosis, the cheerful harmonies contrasted with the devastating news, the fact that they turned HIV diagnosis into entertainment, All of it sparked immediate backlash from AIDS service organizations. People who'd lost loved ones to AIDS, who'd watched friends waste away during the epidemic, had to watch Family Guy treat it as comedy. The show has done cutaways mocking Anne Frank, showing Peter hiding with the Frank family and eating potato chips so loudly that he attracts Nazi attention, suggesting he's responsible for their capture. Anne Frank was a real girl who died in a concentration camp. Her diary is one of the most important Holocaust testimonies in existence, and Family Guy used her as a setup for a joke about Peter being inconsiderate. There was a cutaway about Michael J. Fox, showing him shaking while holding a can that sprays paint on Peter's shirt. Fox has Parkinson's disease, a degenerative neurological disorder that causes tremors and has no cure. The show made his medical condition the punchline. Imagine having an incurable disease and turning on the TV to see a cartoon mocking your symptoms for laughs. The show has done cutaways about school shootings, showing Peter as a troubled teen, threatening to make the popular kids pay. This aired at a time when school shootings were becoming increasingly common in America, when real teenagers were dying, and real communities were being traumatized. The show took that fear and made it a joke. What's particularly disturbing about these cutaways is their randomness. They appear without warning, without context, and without consequence. The show moves from one disturbing image to the next at lightning speed, never giving viewers time to process what they've just seen. It's comedy through shock, through the sheer audacity of going places other shows won't go. But at what cost? Let's talk about the show's relationship with real celebrities and public figures. Family Guy has mocked countless famous people over the years, but some instances cross the line from satire into something darker. The Kevin Spacey reference is one of the most infamous. In 2005, during the season 4 episode Peterotica, there's a brief cutaway where Stewie runs through a mall yelling that he's escaped from Kevin Spacey's basement. This aired years before Spacey was publicly accused of sexual misconduct involving minors. Seth MacFarlane has stated repeatedly that the writers knew nothing about Spacey's behavior, and that the joke was written completely at random. But was it? Hollywood has long been known for its open secrets, rumors that circulate among industry insiders about which celebrities engage in inappropriate behavior. Did someone on the writing staff know something? Or was it truly just a coincidence that Family Guy made a joke about Kevin Spacey and children that would later seem horrifyingly prescient? MacFarlane himself has been vocal about Hollywood's dark secrets. In 2013, while announcing the Oscar nominees, he made a joke about how the women nominated no longer had to pretend to be attracted to Harvey Weinstein. This was years before the Weinstein scandal broke publicly, suggesting MacFarlane knew about the producer's predatory behavior. If he knew about Weinstein, what else did he know? What other jokes on Family Guy might be based on actual knowledge of misconduct? This creates a disturbing possibility. Some of Family Guy's most shocking jokes might not be jokes at all. They might be veiled references to real Hollywood secrets, hidden in plain sight behind the show's reputation for random offensive humor. When you watch the show through this lens, certain cutaways become much more sinister. Are they just being provocative, or are they telling us something? The show's handling of transgender issues has been particularly controversial and disturbing to many viewers. In the Season 8 episode, Quagmire's dad, Quagmire's father, comes out as a transgender woman. The episode is filled with transphobic jokes, including scenes where Peter vomits repeatedly for an extended period after learning he'd been attracted to a trans woman. The episode suggests that trans women are deceptive, that they're really just men, and that being attracted to a trans woman is disgusting. LGBTQ advocacy groups condemned the episode, arguing it perpetuated harmful stereotypes and contributed to transphobic attitudes. But Family Guy has defended its right to joke about anything and anyone, arguing that equal opportunity offense is part of the show's DNA. The question is whether equal opportunity offense is actually equal when some groups face real-world discrimination and violence, partly fueled by the very stereotypes the show reinforces. Trans people face disproportionately high rates of violence, discrimination, and suicide. When a show as popular as Family Guy portrays trans people as jokes or deceptive, it contributes to a culture where trans lives are devalued. The episode wasn't just offensive, it was potentially dangerous, giving transphobes cultural ammunition to justify their bigotry. Let's discuss the show's treatment of religion, because it's been consistently disturbing to religious viewers. The show has mocked Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and virtually every other faith with equal enthusiasm. But some episodes go beyond mockery into territory that many find genuinely hateful. The episode Not All Dogs Go to Heaven features Meg becoming a born-again Christian, and the show portrays Christians as stupid, brainwashed cult members. Brian burns down a church and is portrayed as the hero for doing so. The episode generated thousands of complaints, with religious groups arguing the show was promoting anti-Christian bigotry. The episode suggested that belief in God is for idiots, that religious people are sheep, and that militant atheism is the only rational position. For people whose faith is central to their identity, watching their beliefs characterized this way can be genuinely painful. But here's what's particularly disturbing. The show seems to reserve its harshest mockery for Christianity, while being more careful with other religions. When they've dealt with Islam, the jokes have been milder, perhaps because the creators fear violent repercussions. This suggests the show isn't actually committed to equal opportunity offense. They punch down at groups they know won't fight back, while being cautious with groups that might. The episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein sparked controversy for its portrayal of Judaism, but the show has actually been relatively mild in its treatment of Jewish people compared to its treatment of Christians. This selective sensitivity reveals something disturbing about the show's moral calculations. They'll say anything, unless saying it might have real consequences for them personally. Now let's talk about something truly disturbing that most fans don't know. The show's production process takes 10 months per episode. Think about what that means. Every episode you watch was created almost a year before you see it. The writers, animators, voice actors, and editors spend 10 months bringing each 22-minute episode to life. 10 months of work for less than half an hour of content. This extended production time means the show can rarely comment on current events. By the time an episode about something topical is finished, that thing is no longer topical. So the show lives in this strange, timeless space where pop culture references might be outdated by the time they air. But here's what's truly disturbing about this. It means that when something goes wrong, when an episode includes a joke that becomes horrifically inappropriate due to real-world events, the episode is already finished and scheduled to air before anyone realizes the problem. The Boston Marathon cutaway in Turban Cowboy is the perfect example. That episode was completed many months before the bombing. When the tragedy occurred, the episode was already animated, voiced, edited, and scheduled. Fox pulled it immediately after it aired, but the damage was done. The episode existed, the joke had been made, and now it was out in the world. The 10-month production cycle meant there was no way to course correct, no way to catch the problem before broadcast. This raises questions about responsibility in entertainment. If you create something that seems fine at the time, but becomes horrifying due to circumstances beyond your control, are you responsible? Should content creators be expected to predict future events and avoid jokes that might become inappropriate? Or is it just bad luck, a random alignment of comedy and tragedy that no one could have foreseen? The show costs approximately $2 million per episode to produce. That's $2 million for 22 minutes of content. Over the show's run, accounting for inflation and production cost increases, Family Guy has probably cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. All that money, all that effort, all those resources devoted to a show whose creator wishes it would end, whose content has been banned, pulled, and censored repeatedly, and whose legacy is as controversial as it is influential. Let's talk about the show's influence on animation and comedy, because this might be the most disturbing thing of all. Family Guy changed what was acceptable on television. Before Family Guy, animated shows were either family-friendly, like The Simpsons, or more niche, like South Park. Family Guy proved that you could be crude, offensive, and controversial on a major network, and not just survive, but thrive. It opened the door for shows like American Dad, The Cleveland Show, Archer, BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty, and countless others. But in opening that door, Family Guy normalized certain kinds of humor that might be genuinely harmful. The show popularized cutaway gags that have no connection to the main story, teaching a generation of comedy writers that randomness and shock value can substitute for actual plot and character development. The show demonstrated that you could be offensive without consequence, that you could mock any group or individual without fear of real backlash because you could always hide behind the defense that it's just a joke. Family Guy taught television that attention is more valuable than respect, that controversy generates ratings, and that being canceled or banned can actually increase your cultural cachet. The show's success proved that you don't need to care about consistency, character growth, or narrative coherence. You just need to be willing to go further than anyone else, to say things that other shows won't say, to shock and disturb your audience enough that they can't look away. And perhaps most disturbingly, Family Guy taught audiences to accept this. Viewers learned to laugh at jokes about dead babies, Holocaust victims, and sexual assault. They learned that nothing is sacred, that everything can be comedy, and that being offended makes you humorless and uptight. The show created a cultural space where cruelty is comedy, where mockery is entertainment, and where the most vulnerable people in society are fair game for jokes. The Parents Television Council, a conservative watchdog group, has called Family Guy the worst show on television over 40 times. They've filed numerous complaints with the FCC, launched letter-writing campaigns to Fox demanding the show's cancellation, and warned parents that the show's animation style might attract children, despite its adult content. The PTC represents millions of concerned parents who believe Family Guy is poisoning American culture, corrupting youth, and normalizing behavior that should be condemned. But here's what's disturbing. The PTC's campaigns have likely helped the show more than hurt it. Every time they declare Family Guy the worst show on television, they give it free publicity. Every complaint they file generates news coverage. Every warning they issue makes the show seem edgier and more appealing to its target audience. The PTC and Family Guy exist in a symbiotic relationship where the council's outrage feeds the show's notoriety, and the show's content gives the council something to be outraged about. Neither can exist without the other. The relationship between MacFarlane and the PTC president eventually became oddly friendly, with MacFarlane reaching out after a particularly controversial episode to discuss their differences. They reportedly became friends, which is disturbing in its own way. The man creating content specifically designed to offend conservative values became friends with the woman leading the charge against that content. It suggests that none of it was ever real, that the outrage and controversy were just performances, theater designed to benefit both parties. Let's talk about the deaths on Family Guy, both on screen and behind the scenes. The show has killed off recurring characters multiple times, usually for shock value or as story devices. Brian's death was the most controversial, but there was also the death of Diane Simmons, James Woods' character being killed multiple times, and countless one-off characters who died for jokes. But beyond the fictional deaths, real people connected to the show have died, and the show's response has been disturbing in its casualness. Adam West, who voiced Mayor Adam West on the show, died in June 2017. The show dedicated an episode to his memory, but they'd also spent years making him the butt of jokes, portraying him as a senile, delusional old man who'd speak to invisible people and make bizarre decisions. Was this tribute genuine, Or was it the show trying to retroactively claim they'd honored him when they'd actually spent years mocking him? West apparently loved his role on the show, but watching it back after his death, knowing he's gone, the jokes feel different, meaner, more like we were laughing at an elderly man's decline rather than with a brilliant comedic actor. Carrie Fisher voiced Peter's boss Angela for several episodes. When Fisher died in December 2016, the show said very little. She'd been part of the Family Guy family, contributing her talents to multiple episodes, and her death was barely acknowledged. The show that makes jokes about everyone's death was strangely quiet about the death of one of their own. Norm Macdonald, who voiced Death himself, died in September 2021 after a private battle with cancer. The show's response was respectful, but brief. The man who'd personified death for them was dead, and they moved on quickly. It's almost as if the show's constant joking about death has made real death something they don't know how to process. They've become so desensitized by making death a punchline that when it happens for real, they have no language for genuine grief. Let's discuss one of the most disturbing aspects of modern Family Guy. The show has essentially become a zombie, continuing long past the point where it has anything new to say. Recent seasons have been criticized for recycling jokes, rehashing plots, and lacking the energy of earlier seasons. The cutaway gags feel tired. The pop culture references feel dated by the time they air. The characters have become parodies of themselves, their worst traits amplified to the point where they're no longer funny, just annoying. Peter has gone from lovable idiot to genuinely unbearable. Lois has gone from patient wife to enabler. Stewie has gone from world domination plotting baby to essentially just a gay character whose entire personality revolves around his sexuality. Brian has gone from voice of reason to insufferable, pretentious failure. Chris and Meg remain largely unchanged because the show has never cared enough about them to develop them. The show is trapped in amber, unable to evolve, but unable to die. Critics have compared Family Guy unfavorably to The Simpsons and South Park. The Simpsons, despite declining quality in later seasons, maintains a certain heart and hasn't abandoned its characters' core decency. South Park continues to evolve, taking on current events and changing with the times. But Family Guy just keeps doing the same thing it's always done, except less well. The show has become what it once mocked: a tired, repetitive product churning out content for money rather than art. What makes this particularly disturbing is that everyone involved seems to know it. MacFarlane has admitted he wanted the show to end. The writers have moved on to other projects. Even fans acknowledge that the show peaked years ago. But it keeps going because it's profitable. Fox has renewed it through at least 2029. The machine will keep running, producing episodes that fewer and fewer people care about, until eventually someone at the network decides the numbers no longer justify the cost. The show has become a metaphor for late-stage capitalism in entertainment. It doesn't matter if it's good. It doesn't matter if anyone likes it. It doesn't matter if the creator wants it to continue. All that matters is whether it generates revenue. Family Guy will continue until it's no longer profitable, and then it will be quietly canceled, and everyone will move on as if it never existed. The show that made its name by being transgressive and edgy will end not with a bang, but with a whimper. Just another canceled sitcom in television history. Let's talk about something that's been disturbing from the beginning: the show's treatment of women. Lois is repeatedly shown as a sex object, with plots revolving around men being attracted to her. Meg is viciously abused by everyone. Female guest characters are often reduced to love interests or objects of sexual desire. The show has been accused of misogyny countless times, and while it defends itself by saying it offends everyone equally, the pattern is clear. Women on Family Guy exist primarily in relation to men, and their value is determined by their attractiveness or usefulness to the male characters. The episode Peter Assment deals with sexual harassment when Peter's new female boss sexually harasses him. The episode attempts to address workplace sexual harassment, but it does so through comedy that often seems to trivialize the issue. Peter is shown enjoying some of the attention before becoming uncomfortable, and the resolution involves workplace violence rather than proper HR procedures. For people who've experienced workplace sexual harassment, the episode can feel like their trauma is being mined for comedy. Then there's the persistent sexualization of Lois by the show itself. Camera angles linger on her body. Characters comment on her appearance constantly. Even her own infant son Stewie has made sexual comments about her. The show seems unable to let Lois exist as a character without constantly reminding viewers that she's meant to be attractive. This reduces her from a person to an object, from a character to a collection of physical attributes that exist for male viewing pleasure. What's particularly disturbing is how the show handles age and attractiveness for its female characters. Lois is constantly worried about aging, about losing her looks, about becoming invisible. When she gains weight or gets older, the show treats it as a catastrophe. Male characters age without comment, but female characters' value decreases with every year. The show reinforces harmful beauty standards and suggests that women are only worth paying attention to if they're young and conventionally attractive. Let's talk about the show's depiction of violence against women. Women are hit, pushed, and physically assaulted throughout the series, often for laughs. In one analysis, someone counted that in the first 14 episodes of season 11, there were 14 instances of violence against women. That's once per episode on average. Women being knocked down, slapped, beaten, or killed became so routine that viewers stopped noticing it. This normalization of violence against women is deeply disturbing. Domestic violence is a serious problem that affects millions of women. Making it funny, treating it as just another gag, contributes to a culture where violence against women isn't taken seriously. The show's defenders argue that everyone gets hurt on Family Guy, that violence is part of the show's cartoon logic. But the pattern is clear. Women are disproportionately the targets of violence, and that violence is meant to be entertaining. The show has also dealt with rape jokes, which is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of its treatment of women. Various episodes have included jokes about rape, sexual assault, and non-consensual sexual activity. These aren't subtle references. They're explicit jokes where sexual assault is the punchline. For survivors of sexual assault, encountering these jokes unexpectedly while watching what's supposedly a comedy can be genuinely traumatic. The show doesn't include trigger warnings. It doesn't prepare viewers for disturbing content. It just throws rape jokes in alongside jokes about pop culture and fart humor, as if they're all equally acceptable subjects for comedy. One particularly controversial moment came in The Simpsons Guy, a crossover episode with The Simpsons that aired in 2014. The episode included a rape joke in the trailer that generated controversy before the episode even aired. Advocacy groups pointed out that rape jokes normalize sexual violence and contribute to rape culture. The show's response was essentially that nothing should be off limits for comedy, that if you can joke about anything, you have to be able to joke about everything. But this argument ignores power dynamics. Jokes about the powerful are different from jokes about the powerless. Jokes about abstract concepts are different from jokes about real trauma that affects millions of people. When you make rape jokes, you're not just being edgy. You're potentially re-traumatizing survivors and contributing to a culture where sexual assault isn't taken seriously. Let's discuss the show's approach to race, which has been disturbing and problematic from the beginning. Cleveland Brown, one of the main characters, was voiced by Mike Henry, a white actor, for 20 years. In June 2020, following increased attention to racial issues after George Floyd's murder, Henry announced he was stepping down from the role, stating that persons of color should play characters of color. Arif Zahar took over the role in September 2020. But this raises disturbing questions. Why did it take 20 years for anyone to address this? Why was it acceptable for a white actor to voice a black character for 2 decades. The practice of white actors voicing characters of color has a long history in animation, but that doesn't make it right. It means that Cleveland's voice, his mannerisms, his personality, were all filtered through a white person's interpretation of how a black person should sound and act. The show has made countless jokes about race over the years. Some argue these jokes satirize racism, but others point out that the line between satirizing racism and being racist is often unclear, especially when the writing staff has historically been predominantly white. Cleveland himself has been portrayed with various stereotypes, from his slow way of speaking to plots revolving around racial issues. The Cleveland Show, a spin-off that ran for 4 seasons, was criticized for similar issues, with a predominantly white creative team telling stories about black characters. Beyond Cleveland, the show has included jokes about Asian people, Latino people, and virtually every racial and ethnic group. These jokes often rely on stereotypes and accent humor. Trisha Takanawa, the Asian reporter character, speaks in an accent and is portrayed with stereotypical Asian characteristics. Consuela, the Hispanic maid, is portrayed as barely speaking English and being obsessed with cleaning. These characters reduce entire ethnic groups to simplistic stereotypes for comedy. What's particularly disturbing is how the show uses its animation medium to shield itself from criticism. In live action, casting white actors in roles of color, using accents to mock other cultures, and relying on racial stereotypes would face immediate backlash. But because Family Guy is a cartoon, because everything is drawn, the show gets away with things that would be unacceptable in other contexts. The animation creates a layer of separation, allowing the show to claim it's all just drawings, just jokes, just harmless fun. Let's talk about class issues on Family Guy, because this is disturbing in subtle ways. The Griffins are working class. Peter has had various blue-collar jobs throughout the series. They live in a modest house in a regular neighborhood. Yet the show often mocks poor people, treating poverty as a source of humor. Characters who are poorer than the Griffins are portrayed as stupid, dirty, or morally inferior. The show punches down at people with less money, less education, and fewer opportunities. At the same time, the show mocks the wealthy, with the Pewterschmidts portrayed as out-of-touch elitists. So the show mocks both rich and poor, which might seem balanced, but it leaves the Griffins in the middle as the norm. The message seems to be that being working class is good, but being too poor or too rich is bad. This reinforces class hierarchies rather than challenging them. It suggests that everyone should aspire to be middle class and that deviation in either direction is somehow wrong. The show rarely addresses the economic anxieties that actual working class families face. Peter loses jobs regularly, but the family never seems to experience real financial hardship. They still take vacations, still have money for luxuries, still live comfortably, despite Peter's frequent unemployment. The show uses working class setting as aesthetic without actually engaging with working class issues. This is disturbing because Family Guy has a large working class audience. People tune in expecting to see their lives reflected on screen, and instead they see a fantasy version of working class life where nothing bad really happens, where financial struggles are temporary and never that serious. The show presents a sanitized version of working class existence that ignores the real struggles of poverty, job insecurity, and economic inequality. Now let's discuss one of the most disturbing things about Family Guy: its influence on real-world behavior. Studies have shown that exposure to violent media doesn't directly cause violence, but it can normalize violent behavior and decrease empathy. Family Guy presents a world where violence has no consequences, where cruelty is funny, and where human life has no value. Viewers, especially young viewers whose brains are still developing, internalize these messages. Teachers have reported students imitating Family Guy humor in classrooms. making offensive jokes, and then claiming they're just kidding when called out. Therapists have seen clients who struggle to take serious issues seriously because they've been conditioned to see everything as potential comedy material. Parents have watched their children become more callous, more willing to mock others after watching the show. The show's defenders argue that people are responsible for their own behavior, that television doesn't force anyone to do anything. But cultural products shape how we see the world. They influence what we consider normal, acceptable, and funny. When a show as popular as Family Guy normalizes cruelty, it changes the culture. It makes the world a little bit meaner, a little bit less empathetic, a little bit more willing to laugh at suffering. This isn't hypothetical. There have been incidents of people citing Family Guy while engaging in harmful behavior, using the show's humor as justification for their actions. The show has become cultural shorthand for nothing matters and everything is funny. It's given people permission to be their worst selves and call it entertainment. Let's talk about the show's relationship with censorship and the concept of free speech. Family Guy has positioned itself as a defender of free expression, arguing that comedy should be unlimited and nothing should be off limits. The episode PTV explicitly deals with FCC censorship, satirizing content restrictions on television. The show presents itself as a champion of artistic freedom, fighting against prudish censors who don't understand comedy. But here's what's disturbing about this position. Free speech isn't just about the right to say whatever you want. It's also about the responsibility that comes with that right. The show wants all the freedom to offend, but accepts none of the responsibility for the offense. It wants to shock and disturb without acknowledging that shock and disturbance can cause real harm. The show hides behind satire, claiming that jokes about sensitive topics are actually commentary on those topics, rather than exploitation of them. But satire requires a clear target. It requires the audience to understand what's being criticized. When Family Guy makes a joke about the Holocaust, what's being satirized? Nazis? We all agree Nazis are bad. The Holocaust itself? Making light of genocide isn't satire. It's just offensive. The people who don't understand that the Holocaust was bad? Those people aren't watching Family Guy and having their minds changed. The show's claim to be satire falls apart under scrutiny. Most of the time, Family Guy isn't satirizing anything. It's just being offensive for the sake of offense. The shock value is the point. The jokes don't have deeper meaning or social commentary. They're just designed to make you gasp and then laugh at your own gasping. That's not satire. That's just provocation. Let's talk about addiction, both on the show and in the audience. Brian is an alcoholic. This is played for laughs throughout the series. He's constantly drunk, constantly drinking, and his alcoholism is treated as a character quirk rather than a serious problem. For people struggling with alcohol addiction, or for people who love someone with an addiction problem, watching Brian's alcoholism be treated as comedy can be genuinely painful. The show trivializes a disease that destroys lives and families. Peter also drinks heavily throughout the series, often to excess. The Drunken Clam is a recurring location where Peter and friends spend countless hours drinking. The show treats alcohol consumption as fun and consequence-free. Characters never face DUI charges, never struggle with addiction, never experience health problems from their drinking. It's all just harmless fun, except alcoholism isn't harmless. It kills people. It destroys families. It's a serious problem that affects millions of people, and the show treats it like a joke. But there's another kind of addiction related to Family Guy. The show itself is designed to be addictive. The rapid-fire cutaway gags, the pop culture references, the shock humor, all of it is engineered to keep viewers watching. The show operates on the same principles as social media. Constant stimulation, rapid dopamine hits, no time to get bored. You watch one episode, then another, because the show never slows down enough for you to stop. This is disturbing because it's manipulative. The show isn't just entertaining you, it's exploiting your brain's reward systems to keep you watching. And what are you watching? Content that normalizes cruelty, trivializes serious issues, and makes the world seem like a place where nothing matters and everything is meaningless. You're being addicted to nihilism, trained to find suffering funny and empathy unnecessary. Let's discuss the show's handling of disability and mental illness, which has been consistently disturbing. Joe Swanson is in a wheelchair, and while the show sometimes shows him as capable and heroic, it also constantly makes jokes about his disability. His inability to walk is treated as a source of humor. Other characters make insensitive comments about his condition. The show presents disability as both something to be overcome and something to be mocked, sending mixed messages about how society should view disabled people. Mental illness is treated even worse. Characters display symptoms of various mental illnesses, but these are always played for laughs. Stewie clearly has some form of personality disorder, given his violent tendencies and lack of empathy. Peter might have an intellectual disability, given his low intelligence and poor impulse control. Brian is depressed and alcoholic, but none of these characters receive treatment or support. Their conditions are just joke fodder. The show has done episodes about mental illness, including Peter getting institutionalized in the episode Petarded. But these episodes treat mental illness as something funny rather than something serious. Psychiatric hospitals are portrayed as places full of crazy people doing wacky things. Mental health professionals are shown as ineffective or corrupt. The message is that mental illness isn't a real problem requiring real treatment. It's just comedy material. For people living with mental illness, or for people who love someone with mental illness, these portrayals are disturbing. They contribute to stigma. They make it harder for people to seek help. They suggest that mental illness is either fake or something to be ashamed of. The show takes real suffering and turns it into entertainment, with no regard for the people whose lives are actually affected by these conditions. Let's talk about the show's treatment of animals, particularly Brian. He's a dog, but he walks upright, talks, dates human women, and is treated as essentially human. This creates disturbing implications. When Brian dates human women, is that bestiality? The show plays this for laughs, but it raises genuine questions about consent and appropriate relationships. When Brian expresses attraction to Meg or Lois, is that incestuous or just weird? The show never addresses these questions seriously. The show has also depicted animal abuse multiple times. Peter has been shown hitting Brian, mistreating him, and generally treating him poorly, despite Brian being both his pet and his best friend. This sends disturbing messages about how animals should be treated. If you can hit your dog when you're angry, if you can neglect your pet's needs, if you can treat an animal as property rather than a living being with feelings, then what's the limit? What's acceptable? The show's inconsistent portrayal of Brian as both dog and human creates a space where animal abuse can be played for laughs. When Peter hits Brian, is it animal abuse? Or is it just one friend hitting another? The show wants it both ways, treating Brian as human when it's convenient for plots, but as a dog when they want to make jokes about animals. Let's discuss something that might be the most disturbing thing of all: the show's legacy. Family Guy will be remembered as one of the most influential animated comedies in television history. It changed what was acceptable on TV. It launched careers. It made Seth MacFarlane one of the most powerful people in entertainment. But at what cost? The show normalized cruelty. It taught a generation that nothing is sacred and everything can be mocked. It created a culture where people compete to be the most offensive, the most shocking, the most willing to cross lines. It contributed to the coarsening of public discourse, where empathy is seen as weakness and sensitivity is seen as something to be mocked. Young people who grew up watching Family Guy learned that comedy means making fun of everyone and everything. They learned that caring about things makes you a target. They learned that the worst thing you can be is offended, that being upset about something means you're too sensitive and can't take a joke. These lessons have shaped how an entire generation interacts with the world. The show's influence extends beyond comedy. Its rapid-fire editing style, its reliance on non sequiturs and random cutaways has influenced how people consume media. We've become accustomed to constant stimulation, to jokes that don't need setup or payoff, to references without context. We've lost the ability to sit with slow-paced content, to appreciate subtlety, to value coherence. Family Guy trained us to have shorter attention spans and to expect constant entertainment. The show has also influenced politics and public discourse. Its both sides approach to satire, where nothing is taken seriously and everything is equally mockable, has contributed to a political culture where nothing matters. If everything is a joke, then nothing is important. If every position is equally ridiculous, then there's no point in having principles. Family Guy's nihilism has infected how we talk about serious issues, making it harder to have genuine conversations about things that actually matter. The show will eventually end, whether through cancellation or simply running out of steam. When it does, we'll be left to reckon with what it's created. A generation that finds suffering funny. A culture that values shock over substance. A world where nothing is sacred and everything is meaningless. That's Family Guy's legacy, and it's disturbing to contemplate what that means for the future. Let's close by talking about the most disturbing fact of all. The show isn't special. Everything we've discussed, all the offensive content, the harmful stereotypes, the normalization of cruelty, none of it is unique to Family Guy. The show is just one example of a larger pattern in entertainment where shock value substitutes for quality, where offense equals attention, and where harm is justified by profit. Family Guy succeeded because it was willing to go places other shows wouldn't. But now, every show is trying to be Family Guy. Every comedian is trying to be edgier, more offensive, more willing to cross lines. The race to the bottom has no finish line. There's always something more shocking to say, some new taboo to violate, some group that hasn't been mocked enough yet. The disturbing truth is that Family Guy isn't an aberration. It's the norm. It's what entertainment has become, in an age where attention is currency and outrage is free marketing. The show didn't create this culture. It just understood it before anyone else did. And now we're all living in the world Family Guy helped create, where nothing matters and everything is funny. And the worst thing you can be is someone who cares. So what are we supposed to do with all this information? How should we feel about a show that's been part of pop culture for over 2 decades, that's entertained millions of people, that's launched careers and influenced countless other creators, but that's also caused real harm, normalized cruel behavior, and contributed to a coarser, meaner culture? Maybe the most disturbing thing about Family Guy is that there's no clear answer. The show is simultaneously important and harmful, influential and toxic, entertaining and disturbing. It's made us laugh and made us uncomfortable, sometimes in the same moment. It's pushed boundaries that needed pushing and crossed lines that should have been respected. It's exactly what it set out to be, a show that offends everyone equally. And in doing so, it's revealed something uncomfortable about ourselves and our culture. We've laughed at things we probably shouldn't have. We've enjoyed content that's hurt other people. We've been entertained by a show that reflects the worst of what we're capable of as a society. And we've kept watching, kept tuning in, kept making the show successful, despite all of its problems. That complicity, that willingness to overlook harm in favor of entertainment, might be the most disturbing fact about Family Guy of all. Not what the show is, but what our enjoyment of it says about us. But we're not done yet. There's so much more darkness to uncover, so many more disturbing facts that need to be brought into the light. Let's continue peeling back the layers of this show that has simultaneously entertained and horrified us for over 20 years. Let's talk about the show's production team and what happens behind closed doors in the writer's room. The writing staff of Family Guy has been predominantly male and white throughout most of its run. Cherry Cheva Pravatamrong is one of the few female writers who has worked consistently on the show, and she's often the only woman in the room when jokes are being pitched. Think about what that means when the show is writing jokes about women, about minorities, about sensitive topics. The perspective in the room is limited, filtered through a specific demographic that may not fully understand or appreciate the impact of what they're creating. Writers have described the Family Guy room as intense and competitive. Everyone is trying to pitch the funniest joke, the most shocking gag, the most outrageous cutaway. There's pressure to top each other, to go further than the last joke, to find new boundaries to cross. In this environment, sensitivity readers or consideration of impact can be seen as obstacles to comedy rather than necessary guardrails. The goal is to be funny, and if someone gets hurt, well, that's just the price of comedy. This creates a disturbing dynamic where writers are incentivized to ignore potential harm. The writer who says, maybe we shouldn't make a joke about that, is seen as the person who doesn't get it, who's too sensitive, who's killing the vibe in the room. So writers stay quiet, or they participate, or they leave the show. The ones who stay are the ones who are comfortable with the show's approach, creating a self-selecting environment where dissenting voices are filtered out. Former writers have occasionally spoken about their time on Family Guy, though most are careful not to burn bridges in an industry where connections matter. Some have expressed pride in their work on the show, pointing to episodes they're particularly happy with or jokes they thought worked well. Others have been more circumspect, acknowledging that some things they wrote for the show make them uncomfortable in retrospect. But most maintain a public face of loyalty to the show, praising MacFarlane's vision and the collaborative environment, even if privately they have doubts. What's disturbing is what this says about the entertainment industry as a whole. Writers need jobs. Animators need work. Voice actors need gigs. When you're offered a position on a successful show, you don't turn it down because you're uncomfortable with some of the content. You take the job, you do the work, and you cash the checks. Everyone involved. And Family Guy has made this calculation at some point, deciding that whatever objections they might have are outweighed by the career benefits of being associated with a hit show. This isn't unique to Family Guy, of course. Every show that pushes boundaries has people behind the scenes who are uncomfortable with what they're creating. But Family Guy pushes further than most, which means the compromise is greater. How many people have written jokes they personally found offensive because that's what the show required? How many animators have drawn scenes they found disturbing because that was their job? How many voice actors have delivered lines that made them uncomfortable because their contract required it? The show has employed hundreds of people over its run. Artists, writers, editors, composers, sound engineers, production assistants, all contributing their talents to create content that many find offensive or harmful. Each of them has to reconcile their participation in the show with their personal values. Some probably have no problem with it. Others might struggle with cognitive dissonance, telling themselves that it's just a job, that they're not responsible for the content they're helping create, that someone else would do it if they didn't. Let's discuss the show's relationship with its audience, because this is particularly disturbing. Family Guy knows exactly who watches it. The core demographic is young men, typically between 18 and 34. These are people in a formative stage of life, figuring out who they are and what they believe. And what is Family Guy teaching them? The show is teaching them that edginess is more important than empathy, that being offensive is the same as being funny, that people who object to harmful content are just too sensitive and should be mocked. that there's no topic that shouldn't be joked about, no line that shouldn't be crossed, no person or group that deserves protection from mockery. These lessons are being absorbed by millions of young viewers who are learning how to interact with the world. But here's what's even more disturbing. The show doesn't just influence how its audience sees the world. It influences how they see themselves. Young men watching Family Guy see Peter Griffin as someone to emulate. He's crude, he's thoughtless, he's often mean, but he's also the protagonist. The show is about him. His perspective is the default. When Peter does terrible things, there are no consequences. When he hurts people, they forgive him or forget about it by the next episode. When he's offensive, it's treated as endearing rather than reprehensible. This creates a model of masculinity that's deeply problematic. Real men, the show suggests, don't worry about feelings. They say what they think without considering the impact. They prioritize their own desires over others' needs. They drink heavily. They make inappropriate sexual comments. They neglect their responsibilities. And somehow, everything works out fine. This isn't just entertainment. It's ideology disguised as comedy. It's teaching young men how to be men. And the lessons are disturbing. The show also teaches its audience about relationships. Peter and Lois's marriage is dysfunctional by any reasonable standard. Peter is constantly disrespectful to Lois. He ignores her, mocks her, betrays her trust, and generally treats her terribly. And yet they stay together, and the show suggests this is normal. This is what marriage is supposed to look like, apparently. Fighting all the time, having no respect for each other, staying together out of obligation or inertia rather than love. Young people watching this internalize these patterns. They learn that this is what relationships are, that this is how couples interact. When they enter their own relationships, they may unconsciously recreate these dynamics because that's what they've seen modeled. The show is shaping how an entire generation approaches intimacy and partnership, and the model it's providing is toxic. Let's talk about the show's use of shock value and what that does to viewers over time. When you first encounter Family Guy's brand of humor, it's shocking. The jokes are unexpected, the cutaways are random, and the willingness to offend is surprising. But over time, you become desensitized. Jokes that would have shocked you in season 1 barely register by season 10. The show has to keep escalating, finding new ways to shock you, new boundaries to cross. This creates a disturbing cycle where viewers need increasingly extreme content to get the same reaction. It's like building a tolerance to a drug. What was shocking becomes normal, and normal becomes boring. The show trains you to need more and more extreme content to feel entertained. And when you've watched hundreds of episodes of Family Guy, when you've been exposed to every kind of offensive joke imaginable, what does it take to shock you anymore? This desensitization doesn't stay contained to the show. It affects how you react to real-world events. When you've laughed at jokes about school shootings, does news of an actual school shooting hit you the same way it would have otherwise? When you've seen countless cutaways about death and tragedy turned into punchlines, does real tragedy register emotionally? The show doesn't just entertain you. It rewires your emotional responses, making you less sensitive, less empathetic, less affected by suffering. Some viewers are aware of this and try to maintain boundaries, reminding themselves that the show is just comedy and not a reflection of real values. But most viewers don't consciously think about how the media they consume is affecting them. They just watch, laugh, and absorb the messages without realizing it's happening. By the time they notice any change in themselves, the damage is already done. Let's discuss the international reception of Family Guy because it reveals something disturbing about cultural differences and universal human darkness. The show airs in dozens of countries, often with modified content to comply with local broadcasting standards. In some countries, entire episodes have been banned. In others, Specific jokes or cutaways are removed. What's considered acceptable varies dramatically based on cultural context. In the United Kingdom, the show airs relatively uncensored on BBC Three and other channels, finding a receptive audience that appreciates its irreverent humor. British comedy has its own tradition of provocative content, so Family Guy fits comfortably into that landscape. In Germany, some episodes have been edited or banned due to content about World War II and the Holocaust. In the Middle East, the show faces heavy censorship due to religious content and sexual themes. What's disturbing is that despite these cultural differences, Family Guy finds audiences everywhere. The specifics of what people find funny or offensive might vary, but the appetite for shock humor, for boundary-pushing content, for comedy that doesn't care about sensitivity, that's universal. Every culture has people who want to laugh at things they're not supposed to laugh at, who want to feel like they're getting away with something by watching content that offends someone, somewhere. This suggests something uncomfortable about human nature. We're not just capable of cruelty, we're drawn to it. We enjoy transgression. We like feeling like we're in on a joke that others would find offensive. Family Guy succeeds internationally, not despite its offensive content, but because of it. The show taps into something dark that exists across all cultures, a desire to mock and degrade and laugh at suffering that transcends borders and languages. Let's talk about the show's merchandising, because even this is disturbing when you think about it. There are Family Guy t-shirts, coffee mugs, action figures, video games, and countless other products. Parents buy these items for their children, either unaware of or unconcerned about the show's content. Kids wear Stewie t-shirts without understanding that the character is a homicidal infant, obsessed with matricide. They play with action figures based on characters from a show they're too young to watch. The merchandising creates a pipeline where children are exposed to Family Guy branding before they're old enough to watch the show. They see the characters, they recognize them, and when they're finally old enough to watch, they feel like they're encountering old friends. The marketing is grooming children to become Family Guy fans, preparing them years in advance to consume content that's explicitly not meant for them. The video games are particularly disturbing. Family Guy video game and Family Guy Back to the Multiverse allowed players to control the characters and engage in the kind of violence and destruction that fills the show. These games were rated for mature audiences, but ratings don't prevent children from playing. Kids who've seen the characters on merchandise, who recognize Peter and Stewie and Brian, want to play games featuring those characters. And the games deliver all the offensive content of the show in interactive form, allowing players to actively participate in the violence and cruelty rather than just watching it. The revenue from merchandising is substantial. The show makes money not just from advertising and streaming deals, but from selling products based on its characters and imagery. This creates a financial incentive to keep the show on the air, regardless of quality or social impact. As long as people are buying Family Guy merchandise, Fox has a reason to keep producing episodes. The show has become a brand, an intellectual property to be exploited, rather than an artistic creation with integrity. Let's discuss the show's relationship with other animated series and the feuds that have developed. South Park famously criticized Family Guy in a two-part episode called Cartoon Wars, attacking the show's reliance on cutaway gags and random humor. South Park's episodes suggested that Family Guy's writers are actually manatees pushing balls with random words into idea holes, creating jokes through pure randomness rather than actual writing. The attack was harsh, but reflected a real division in animated comedy. South Park represents one approach: topical, coherent, making actual points through satire. Family Guy represents another: timeless, random, shocking, without necessarily meaning anything. The feud highlighted fundamental questions about what comedy should be and do. Should it have a point, or is being funny enough? Should it comment on society, or just entertain? Family Guy's response was relatively mild, with MacFarlane acknowledging the criticism, but defending his show's approach. But the feud revealed insecurities on both sides. South Park was worried about being lumped in with shows it considered inferior. Family Guy was defensive about being called out for what many critics had been saying for years. The dispute played out through the shows themselves, with each taking shots at the other, and fans were forced to choose sides. What's disturbing about this feud is that it revealed the stakes in animated comedy. These shows aren't just entertainment. They're competing visions of what comedy can and should be. South Park argues that comedy should challenge power, expose hypocrisy, and force viewers to think. Family Guy argues that comedy should just be funny, that overthinking it kills the humor, and that random shock value is a legitimate approach. Both shows have been enormously successful, suggesting there's an audience for both approaches, but they can't both be right about what comedy should be. The feud also demonstrated how seriously the creators take their work, despite producing shows that might seem frivolous. This is their art, their legacy, and they care deeply about how it's perceived. Criticism bothers them not because it hurts their feelings, but because it threatens their place in television history. Will Family Guy be remembered as innovative or lazy? As boundary-pushing or just offensive? The answer matters to MacFarlane and his team, even if they pretend it doesn't. Let's talk about the show's effect on animation as an industry. Before Family Guy's resurrection in 2005, networks were skeptical about adult animation. The Simpsons was an established hit, but it had been on the air since 1989 and was considered an outlier. South Park found success on cable, but that was Comedy Central, not a major network. When Fox brought Family Guy back from cancellation based on strong DVD sales, it proved that adult animation could be profitable in new ways. This led to a boom in adult animated shows. American Dad, The Cleveland Show, Bob's Burgers, and numerous others followed, each trying to capture some of Family Guy's success. Networks became more willing to take risks on animated content aimed at adults, diversifying what was available to viewers. In this sense, Family Guy opened doors and created opportunities. But here's what's disturbing. Many of the shows that followed Family Guy copied its approach rather than its success. They focused on shock humor, random cutaways, and offensive content, thinking that's what made Family Guy work. They missed the craftsmanship, the voice acting, the musical elements, and the occasional genuine emotion that made Family Guy more than just offensive jokes. So we got a wave of shows that were crude without being clever, offensive without being funny, shocking without having anything to say. The industry learned the wrong lessons from Family Guy. Instead of seeing a show that succeeded despite its offensive content, they saw a show that succeeded because of it. Instead of recognizing that Family Guy worked because of its specific combination of elements, they thought anyone could make an offensive cartoon and find an audience. The result was a flood of inferior content that debased the currency of adult animation, making it harder for genuinely good shows to stand out. This has had lasting effects on what gets greenlit and what gets canceled. Shows that are too smart or too subtle struggle to find audiences trained on Family Guy's rapid-fire pace. Shows that take time to develop characters or tell coherent stories are seen as slow. The entire landscape of animated comedy has been shaped by Family Guy's influence, and not always for the better. Let's discuss the voice actors and what it must be like to spend decades bringing these characters to life. Seth MacFarlane voices Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire, spending hours in recording sessions making these distinct voices. After over 20 years, these voices are probably more natural to him than his regular speaking voice. He's spent more time being Peter Griffin than being Seth MacFarlane. What does that do to a person? Alex Borstein has voiced Lois for the entire run of the show, delivering lines that range from maternal to sexual to cruel. She's been the voice of feminine patience with Peter's stupidity, but she's also voiced Lois's darker moments, her manipulation, her contempt. Borstein is an accomplished comedian and actor who's done much more than just Family Guy, but she'll probably be remembered primarily for this role. Her voice is Lois Griffin to millions of people. Mila Kunis took over as Meg when she was just 14 years old, growing up as the voice of the family's punching bag. She's spent her entire adult life voicing a character who exists to be abused. Kunis has become a major Hollywood star, appearing in films and other television shows, but she keeps coming back to voice Meg. She's heard fans joke about how much they hate Meg, knowing that some of that hate extends to her by association. That can't be easy to carry. Seth Green voices Chris with that Buffalo Bill-inspired voice, maintaining that character for hundreds of episodes. He's one of the show's producers now, having moved up behind the scenes, but he still delivers Chris's lines with that same dopey earnestness. Green is also the creator of Robot Chicken and has numerous other projects, but Family Guy remains a constant in his career. Patrick Warburton voices Joe Swanson, the paraplegic neighbor, bringing dignity and humor to a character who could easily be offensive. Warburton's distinctive voice has made Joe one of the show's most beloved supporting characters, and he's maintained that consistency across hundreds of appearances. What must it be like for these actors to watch the show and hear their voices coming from characters doing terrible things? When Peter says something racist, that's MacFarlane's voice. When Lois is cruel to Meg, that's Borstein's voice. They can't distance themselves from the content because they are the content, literally giving voice to these fictional people and their actions. Some voice actors have spoken about maintaining separation between themselves and their characters, treating the recording booth as a performance space where they become someone else. But after thousands of hours over dozens of years, how much separation can really exist? These characters have become part of these actors' identities, and the actors have to live with everything those characters have done. Let's talk about the show's treatment of aging and death, both in terms of content and in terms of what it means to be a show that refuses to age or die. Within the show, characters don't age. Stewie has been a baby for over 20 years. Chris and Meg have been teenagers for their entire existence. The show exists in a perpetual present where time doesn't pass and consequences don't accumulate. This creates a strange temporal space where characters can reference events from different decades within the same episode, where pop culture from the 1970s. 80s exists alongside references to recent events. This timelessness is a cartoon convention, of course. The Simpsons has done the same thing for even longer, but it creates a disturbing disconnect between the show and reality. In the real world, time passes. People age. Things change. But in Quahog, everything stays the same. The Griffins never learn, never grow, never evolve. They're trapped in an eternal present, doomed to repeat the same patterns forever. This serves as a metaphor for the show itself. Family Guy refuses to evolve, refuses to adapt to changing cultural standards, refuses to acknowledge that the world has moved on. The show that seemed edgy and transgressive in 1999 now feels dated and desperate, still trying to shock audiences who've seen it all before. But it can't change because change would mean admitting that the original formula wasn't perfect, that times have changed and the show needs to change with them. The show's refusal to let characters die permanently is particularly disturbing. Brian was killed and brought back. Various supporting characters have died and returned. Death itself is a recurring character who can be tricked or negotiated with. The show treats death as reversible, as just another plot device, denying the finality and significance of mortality. This might seem like harmless cartoon logic, but it contributes to a broader cultural trend of treating death as entertainment, rather than as the profound ending it actually is. Real people connected to the show have died, and the show has had to confront the fact that real death isn't reversible. Adam West died, and Mayor West was retired from the show. Carrie Fisher died, and Angela stopped appearing. These deaths were permanent, creating gaps in the show's ensemble that couldn't be filled by time travel or reanimation. The show's confrontation with real mortality exposed the lie at its heart, that nothing matters and everything is reversible. Some things matter. Some losses are permanent. Some deaths can't be made into jokes. Let's discuss the show's relationship with religion in more depth, because this is one area where the show's nihilism becomes particularly obvious. The show has portrayed God as a character multiple times, usually showing him as flawed, petty, or indifferent. Jesus appears occasionally, often portrayed in ways that would offend devout Christians. The show suggests that religion is for people who need comfort or can't face reality, that faith is a weakness rather than a strength. This perspective isn't surprising for a show created by MacFarlane, who's been open about his atheism. But what's disturbing is how the show presents its atheist perspective as obviously correct, while treating religious belief as obviously wrong. Brian is the show's atheist spokesman, and he's usually portrayed as smarter than religious characters, more rational, more enlightened. When Brian argues with religious people, he wins, because the show is on his side. This one-sided presentation does a disservice to millions of religious viewers who might enjoy other aspects of the show, but have to sit through mockery of their deeply held beliefs. The show asks them to laugh at themselves, to accept that their faith is silly, to admit that atheists like Brian are smarter than they are. That's not satire, it's bullying. It's punching down at people's sincere beliefs and demanding they find it funny. The show's treatment of different religions is also uneven. Christianity is mocked relentlessly. Judaism is treated with more care, perhaps because of sensitivity about anti-Semitism. Islam is barely addressed, possibly because the creators fear violent backlash. This selectivity undermines the show's claims to be equal opportunity offenders. They'll mock some religions freely while treading carefully with others, revealing that their commitment to offense is conditional on perceived consequences. What's particularly disturbing is how the show handles questions of meaning and purpose. In a universe where Family Guy's worldview is correct, where religion is false, and death is final and nothing matters, what's the point of anything? Why be good? Why care about others? Why try to make the world better? The show doesn't have answers to these questions. It just keeps making jokes, as if humor can substitute for meaning, as if laughter can fill the existential void the show has created. Let's talk about the show's influence on political discourse, because this might be one of its most disturbing legacies. Family Guy pioneered a both sides approach to political comedy, where Republicans and Democrats are equally stupid, where all politicians are corrupt, where every position is mockable. This might seem balanced, but it's actually deeply cynical. It suggests that there's no difference between political parties, that both sides are the same, that political engagement is pointless. This both-sidesism has been enormously influential in shaping how young people view politics. If Family Guy taught you that all politicians are crooks, why bother voting? If every political position is equally ridiculous, why bother having opinions? The show's nihilistic approach to politics encourages disengagement, suggesting that being above it all is smarter than actually caring about political issues. The show has made jokes about specific politicians, usually portraying them as buffoons, regardless of party affiliation. George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, all have been mocked on Family Guy. But the mockery is surface level, based on personality quirks rather than policy positions. The show reduces politics to aesthetic choices and personality conflicts, ignoring the actual consequences of political decisions on real people's lives. This depoliticization of politics is disturbing because it encourages viewer apathy. When politics is just fodder for jokes, when all politicians are equally terrible, when every position is equally absurd, why should anyone pay attention? The show teaches viewers that caring about politics makes you either partisan or naive, that the smart position is detached amusement, that the proper response to political issues is a smirk and a cutaway gag. But political decisions matter. They affect healthcare, education, economic opportunity, civil rights, environmental protection, and countless other aspects of people's lives. Treating politics as nothing but comedy material is a privileged position that only works if you're insulated from the consequences of political decisions. Family Guy's political nihilism is disturbing because it teaches viewers that nothing political matters, when in fact, politics matters enormously to millions of people whose lives depend on which party is in power. The show has occasionally tried to make actual political points, usually through Brian's character, but these attempts are undercut by the show's overall approach. When every position is mockable, when every attempt at sincerity is undercut by a cutaway gag, serious political commentary becomes impossible. The show can't commit to saying anything meaningful because that would violate its core principle that nothing is meaningful. Let's discuss the financial aspects of Family Guy, because following the money reveals disturbing truths about why the show continues despite all its problems. Fox pays the show's producers approximately $2 million per episode. Multiply that by the 20-plus episodes per season, and you're looking at over $40 million per year just in production costs. Add in marketing, distribution, and overhead, and the show probably costs Fox around $50 million per year to keep on the air. But the show makes much more than it costs. Advertising revenue from initial broadcasts, syndication fees from cable channels, streaming deals with services like Hulu and Disney+, international distribution rights, DVD sales, and merchandise all generate income. Family Guy has been one of Fox's most profitable shows for years, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. The show isn't on the air because it's good. It's on the air because it's profitable. This profit motive explains why the show continues despite creator burnout, despite declining quality, despite controversies and cancellations. As long as Family Guy makes money, Fox will keep producing it. Quality is secondary to profitability. Social impact is irrelevant if the numbers work. The show will continue until it stops being profitable, regardless of any other consideration. The financial success has made everyone involved very wealthy. MacFarlane's net worth is estimated at over $300 million, much of it from Family Guy and related projects. The main cast members earn substantial salaries. Even writers and producers lower on the totem pole have benefited financially from working on a successful show. Everyone has a financial incentive to keep Family Guy going, to overlook any objections they might have, to keep producing content that generates revenue. This creates a disturbing dynamic where moral or artistic concerns are subordinated to financial interests. A writer might feel uncomfortable with a joke, but they need the paycheck. An animator might find a scene disturbing, but they need the health insurance. A voice actor might object to a line, but they're contractually obligated to perform it. Money doesn't just talk, it silences dissent, making it easier to go along with things you know are wrong, because opposing them would jeopardize your income. The show's profitability also insulates it from consequences. When advocacy groups complain about an episode, when critics pan the show's quality, when fans express disappointment with recent seasons, none of it matters if the revenue stream continues. The show doesn't answer to critics or advocates, or even fans. It answers to advertisers, and executives, and shareholders. And as long as those parties are satisfied, nothing else matters. This is disturbing because it reveals how entertainment works in late capitalism. Content isn't created because it's good or meaningful or socially valuable. It's created because it's profitable. Family Guy will continue extracting every possible dollar from its premise until the premise is exhausted and viewers stop tuning in. Then it will be canceled, and everyone will move on to the next profitable project, having learned nothing except how to make money from television shows. We're nearing the end, But there's one final disturbing fact we need to address. You. Yes, you. The person watching this video about disturbing Family Guy facts. You're part of the problem. We all are. Every view generates revenue. Every discussion generates publicity. Every joke we repeat spreads the show's influence. Every time we laugh at something we know we probably shouldn't, we validate the show's approach. Family Guy exists because we watch it. The show continues because we keep tuning in. The offensive content persists because we keep consuming it. We can complain about the show. We can criticize its impact. We can list all its disturbing elements. But if we keep watching, keep discussing, keep engaging with it, we're supporting it. Our attention is the currency that keeps the show alive. This is the most disturbing fact of all. We know what Family Guy is. We know what it does. We know the harm it causes. And we keep watching anyway. We're complicit in everything we've discussed. The cruel jokes, the offensive content, the normalization of terrible behavior. We participate in all of it by continuing to engage with the show. We've spent 2 hours discussing disturbing Family Guy facts, and in doing so, we've thought about Family Guy for 2 hours, keeping it alive in our minds, ensuring it remains culturally relevant. So what now? Where do we go from here? The show isn't going, anywhere. It's been renewed through at least 2029. New episodes will keep coming. New disturbing content will keep emerging. The machine will keep running, grinding out episodes, generating profits, influencing culture, whether we like it or not. Maybe the real question isn't what's disturbing about Family Guy. Maybe it's what's disturbing about us, that we created a market for this show, that we made it successful, that we keep it alive through our attention and engagement. Family Guy is a mirror reflecting back the worst parts of our culture, and we don't like what we see. But we keep looking anyway, unable to turn away, fascinated and repulsed in equal measure, laughing uncomfortably at our own reflection. And that's the most disturbing fact about Family Guy. Not what the show is, but what our relationship with it reveals about who we are. We've spent years watching a show that mocks everything, values nothing, and treats cruelty as entertainment. And we've loved it. We've made it a success. We've turned it into a cultural institution. What does that say about us? What does it mean that we've embraced a show that embodies the worst aspects of contemporary culture? These are uncomfortable questions, and there are no easy answers. But they're worth asking, even if we don't like what the answers might reveal.